Welcome to Meadowlarkers 80. Yes, that is 80. Howard Bryant here, along with Amin Elhassan and Kate Fagan, our reliable team, bringing an episode that I am really interested in talking about when it comes to over these NBA playoffs. We've talked about failure. We've seen Giannis do it after the strange first round loss to the not really 8 seed Miami Heat. We've seen Joel Embiid talk about it after losing to the Celtics in sort of a mocking way. There's always the looming Derek Jeter quote from back in 1996 when he would say, "If we don't win the World Series, I consider the season a failure." And all of that seems to have come full circle here. Before we get started, let's go really quickly. There's only one honorary captain
What?
and Meadowlarkers 80, just
A
one.
wide receiver, I
It's
hope.
a wide receiver
Yeah.
from San Francisco, Mississippi Valley State. His name is Jerry Rice. There
Uh,
are other 80s. He's a class of one. So
Victor
let's just
Cruz.
it's Victor Cruz.
Oh, thank you,
From
Amin.
That's
Yeah,
right. That's a giant, but from the University of Massachusetts. We'll take that. UMass Amherst. We'll go
yeah.
from there. I mean, I want to start with you because I want to go to the 1980 opus, The Empire Strikes Back, when Darth Vader's lust of capturing and confronting Luke Skywalker has turned him into even more of a murderous madman than he was already being set up to be. Anyone who disappoints Lord Vader in The Empire Strikes Back is a dead
They
man.
get they get
Exactly.
choked.
They get choked. And it's the touchless choke, right? It's over. And he becomes more and more and more insane in his obsession. I bring this to the NBA playoffs. I suggest to you that Doc Rivers has a career 590 winning percentage. In Philadelphia, 3 seasons, 653 winning percentage.
Mm.
His winning percentage has improved at every single stop from Orlando to Boston to the Clippers to Philadelphia. Every
Mm.
stop, he's been more successful in the regular season. He is a coach of the year. He has an NBA title. He has an NBA conference championship. He
1,000
was
victory club.
1,000 victory club and was voted one of the top 15 coaches in NBA history in
Mm.
2022. Mike Budenholzer is a two-time coach of the year. Mike Budenholzer has an NBA title. Mike Budenholzer has a 693 winning percentage in Milwaukee, 604 total. Monty Williams has a conference championship, a 628 winning percentage, and a conference final, and a coach of the year as well. All of these guys are out of a job.
Mm-hmm.
And
Don't
my
forget Nick
question,
Nurse.
and let's not forget Nick Nurse, who also has an NBA title and an NBA Coach
Yeah.
of the Year as well. So all of these guys are out of work, and it's making me question as we move on as well to whether or not Joe Mazzulla is going to survive. Now, he's not in that class, obviously, but same thing. Zero sum, you don't win, you're out regardless. What are you making of this wave and also of this culture that has seemed to be it's been normalized?
Yeah. I think all of those guys have different scenarios, different
Yeah,
situations,
of
right?
course.
Doc Rivers was inherited by his chief basketball decision maker, Daryl Morey. So there's always kind of an unease there. Monty Williams was on a team that was sold midway through the season. And there's always the feeling of I want my own drapes and I want my own floor plans and all that when you have a new owner. Mike Budenholzer, some would argue, was on the cusp of getting fired the year he won a championship. And so that was never too far because once they think that about you, it's not like it's all erased, right? So they're all different scenarios and situations, but I think a lot of it comes down to two very distinct feelings that permeate our sport and perhaps other sports as well. And one is the old Janet Jackson line, "What have you done for me lately?" So it doesn't matter what history we have. It doesn't matter how much of a track record you have of being good at your job. If you didn't get me what I wanted now, then none of that stuff matters. The other part is the increasing difficulty that coaches are facing to quote get buy-in on the hard stuff. And what that means is we're in an era where you have to deliver all the medicine with a spoonful of sugar, to quote Mary Poppins, right? You can't give them the bitter medicine. And if the bitter medicine is still bitter with a spoonful of sugar, you can't give that to them either. And so many of these coaches feel hamstrung and handcuffed in that I can't coach the way I want to because I've got to worry about people liking me. The people I coach, the people I work for, they all have to like me. And so that makes me a less effective version of myself. It's no secret and it's no surprise that the three coaches that are longest tenured also happen to be the three coaches who talk to players any which way. Eric Spoelstra, Greg Popovich, and Steve Kerr. Now, Steve Kerr is seen as he's an easygoing guy, but also Steve Kerr screams and cusses out Draymond Green frequently because he knows that's how to get the most out of him. Greg Popovich demanding, Eric Spoelstra demanding, and some of that ability to do those things comes off of it comes from almost an immunity of, I know I'm not going to lose my job because I screamed at someone or I demanded something of them that was more than what they were giving.
Well, I think, I mean, the point you just mentioned there, that those three coaches that you name checked have reached this place of quote unquote immunity. And I think we're all acknowledging and saying that they've reached that place of immunity, that it means that they are able to coach better because they can make decisions based on what they see, based on knowing players, based on like actually reacting to situations rather than reacting to a theoretical axe dropping on their necks. And yet still the premise of this Meadowlarkers being that like a coach's ability to reach that state of immunity is damn near impossible in this day and age. Like even somebody like Mike Budenholzer, like we said, you would think that 2021 NBA championship would buy him at least like 3 to 5 seasons to continue to work through. So I think that the overall premise still stands where like the question I'm continually asking is, if we see that longevity and a coach reaching a kind of immunity allows for better coaching and allows for teams to continue to gel, then how, and I mean, I have some theories about this, but like, then the question still is like, well, and I mean, you're in this world deeper, then why are more franchises not chasing a kind of longevity, or not chasing is maybe not the right word, but committing to pursuing and more of allowing a coach to reach a state of immunity?
I think go ahead, Howard.
Well, I was going to say, let's also not forget that the three coaches that we mentioned all have something that most coaches don't have. Number one, hardware. But number one, Eric Spoelstra has Pat Riley. LeBron James tried to get Eric Spoelstra fired, right? But you get Pat Riley back there, who is in that camp of, no, we're not going to do that. You've got Greg Popovich, who's got the entire Spurs organization. They're not looking at him like you're the problem. He's got that relationship that you need. And Steve Kerr as well. Nobody cared about the Warriors franchise until they had this run. So they have gotten something. Now, you could make the argument that Doc Rivers left the Celtics. Nobody was trying to get rid of Doc in Boston. He didn't want to do a rebuild, so he left. So maybe had he stayed in Boston, he would have had that dispensation and he would have inherited Jason Tatum and he would have inherited, Jaylen Brown when the time came. But yeah, I think that what you have also, and I'm interested in where you're going to go with this, Amin, is that I think that most teams, most organizations, especially at the ownership level, they all think they can do this. And they don't have the professional respect that you have to have for that job. They don't believe that job is even that important. And I think, we can argue this about which sport the head coach has the most, important value and which ones has the least. And you could argue that, to me, at least, the NBA has the least. because it's such a players league and it's such a best player wins game. And because the contract structure is so imbalanced, I think that the coach matters the very least in the NBA.
More than baseball, where I can have a computer just tell me all my lineups and who to pull and who to put on the mound?
Because there's no equivalent in basketball to knowing how to manage a bullpen. And so because you've got so much division labor, the biggest problem with baseball, the reason why I put basketball behind baseball in that regard is that in baseball, you're only running your best team out there maybe 20% of the time. Maybe. If your best player is Pedro Martinez or Justin Verlander, how many times during a season are you actually playing your very best team? The NBA, you play your best team every night for the most part.
Well,
but baseball, I mean, load management, right? But baseball, even your best player, if it's a pitcher, doesn't play the whole game.
Yeah.
So you have to know how to manage that entire bullpen. And if you don't, that's your ass. You're done. You're fired.
I'm curious to see where the algorithms go, or we can have tipping points on, all right, this is this many pitches, this much torque. We have all the wearable biotech to tell us. And then managers are gone forever. No, but Howard, you're absolutely right. It starts fundamentally with a disrespect for what these people do, right? And I'm not saying every coach is good. And I'm not saying every coach is worthy of let them cook and let's see where it goes. We believe in you, and you have rewarded us for our trust and belief with either success of the highest order championship, as we mentioned with a bunch of those names, or just success. Like I think he's a good coach.
Jerry Sloan.
Jerry Sloan is a great example of that. At that point, the disappointment can only come when you think they're not doing their job. It can't be with the results. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to hear, because they think, oh, sports is a result-based business. Yes, I get it. But if you believed in this person and you know they're doing a good job and you know their processes are sound, then you just kind of have to stick with it. But they don't believe in that stuff. They just think that this person is a caretaker for what's happening. The other part is the pressure of the players, right? And so, Howard, you brought up a great example of the Miami Heat when they signed LeBron James and Chris Bosh, the big three. They famously started the first season 9-8. Everyone was wondering what's wrong. And LeBron, as legend has it, went to Pat Riley and talking to him about kind of struggles of the season at the start of the season. Then he says to him, "Don't you ever get the itch?" And at that moment, Pat Riley leans across the table, stares him in the eye, and says, "I never get the itch." And that was all an allegory for, like, don't you want to come down here and take over and take us to the promised land? Because this kid, this video coordinator, doesn't know what he's doing. And Pat Riley, in that moment, took a stand that took Eric Spoelstra from, I'm just another one of these guys, another one of these names on a carousel, to where he is now, one of the top 15 coaches of all time. And what many people
who's going to the Hall of Fame. Like, Eric Spoelstra's a Hall of Famer.
No, I mean, the top 70 NBA at 75, he's one of the 15 best coaches of all time, along with Doc Rivers on that list. That pretty much cements you. If you're on the NBA 75 list, you're in. He's had the names on that list, so Red Holtzman and Red Auerbach and Phil Jackson and Pat Riley, and Eric Spoelstra's mentioned with those names. He's done. He's cemented forever. But that only happens if he gets that buy-in from his superior at the time, which, forget about a LeBron James. How many organizations in this league? Like Jason Tatum, great player, but we wouldn't call him on the running for greatest player of all time. If he walked into Brad Stevens' office and said, "Don't you get the itch?" about Joe Mazzulla, you think Joe Mazzulla was last in that? You think Joe Mazzulla's surviving that? Anthony Edwards, if he walks in to the office of Tim Connolly in Minnesota and says, "Don't you ever get the itch?" That these guys don't have, they're an endangered species. And by the way, that's why coaches coach scared. That's why coaches play it safe. And they say, "Hey, I'm just giving it to my best player," and everybody just fan out. And everyone's like, "Oh, that's so unimaginative." Yes, it's unimaginative because they don't feel like they can afford the risk of imagination.
Right. Well, yeah, like, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure we're all watching Ted Lasso, right? Or maybe not. But where in this third season, he just, all of a sudden, he thinks he's invented total football, and he just revamps how they're going to play in the middle of the season. And it's like this pure indication of taking a massive risk. And I know this is a scripted series, but a massive risk that ends up paying off. And one that, as I'm watching the Ted Lasso, I'm like, this would never happen in professional sports, because there are, I can count on one hand, and we've mostly named them, the coaches who have the longevity or the promise of longevity enough to actually coach in a way that you would think, oh, this is what coaching actually is. And I mean, like, to your point of like the theoretical Jason Tatum walking into Brad Stevens' office and saying, don't you get the itch? Then the underlying question is like, shouldn't there be like a legitimate reason in those moments? Because this is to the larger question that we're talking about. Like, is our sports culture in some way broken? Our men's sports culture broken? Because if all of what we're saying, yeah,
it's coming to women's sports too. I mean, I don't know.
it absolutely
we're gonna talk
will.
about
Like,
Becky Hammon, right? Like,
yeah,
that's
it is coming to women's sports as well. Like this, you know, we can get off on that tangent in a little bit, but like the way I look at all these coaches is, for the most part, it's like a movie. It's like, where did you choose to end it? Like, if you had given certain guys more time, then they have, then either, you know, they're either going to shit the bed or they're going to do something really astounding and reach the promised land. And it feels like if you're an owner in this day and age and you're looking around and you're like, what would be bucking the trend? Bucking the trend would be like committing yourself to a coach for 5 to 7 years. Like, if you're truly doing your research on the front end, then if a star player walks in, unless they have a really good reason, like, here's why so-and-so needs to be gone, because they don't work hard, they're not there, this makes no sense, in a legitimate way, versus I'm not vibing with him. I assume most of the time, and I mean, I don't know if it is, it's like, I don't think players are coming in with like, here is the 10-point reason why this coach isn't working. And maybe sometimes it is.
I think sometimes. So I had a great conversation with Andrew Hawkins on his show earlier this week. We were talking about losing the locker room. This is off the heels of Joe Mazzulla telling the press that he lost the locker room, which was staggering to hear. And I asked Hawk, hey, you know, have you ever had a coach who lost the locker room? What was that like? And then we got into this conversation of, players have an innate ability to tell when someone's full of shit, when they don't know what they're doing, right? Which is very different from, I don't vibe with you. And he said, he brought up an example. He said, for football players, when a coach comes in and starts talking about tuck your shirt in, you know, take off that earring, you know, don't wear like that automatically erodes a great amount of trust, not because they're not letting me do what I want to do. It's because, hey, we're trying to win football games. You're over here talking about what I'm wearing. Like that right there is a red flag to them that this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. So that does happen where players lose trust in the coach because the coach is demonstrating he doesn't know what he's doing. But then there are other times where it's like, yeah, coach doesn't get me the ball enough. Coach isn't giving me the right amount of minutes. Coach, and that's the stuff where, or even simpler than that, like what happened in Miami. Like, we're not winning. Get this guy out of here.
Let's look at it this way. Let's do a quick little detour here. What gets coaches fired? Losing the locker room is absolutely one of them. That's maybe it's number one. In a partnership league, the NBA is a partnership league. It's not football, where the coach controls your money, where the coach really does have a lot of say. The NFL head coach is the most powerful coach in American sports. And that guy has to have the buy-in from everybody. And so you can't lose the locker room. But in a partnership league where the contracts are guaranteed, where the players have enormously more power than you, where you are the low-hanging fruit. So if there's an issue here, you're the first guy to go because you're the easiest guy to replace. Then, you know, you've got to be able to communicate with those guys, right? You've got to be able to reach them in some way where you aren't so exposed. The second thing that gets coaches fired is a lot of things that don't necessarily have a lot to do with you as a coach. For example, you know, as you were saying with Doc, or also with Monty Williams, when the person who hires you is no longer there, all bets are off. Nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do.
Yep.
You're not my guy. I just want to bring in my guy. That's that. And then there's the other thing, which is results. And on the result side, I always counter how many teams in any league are actually trying to win. There's really only a handful of teams in every sport that are actually trying to win anyway, that this organization is committed to winning. Most teams ain't trying to win anyway. They just scapegoat the coach. But the second piece of results is the reputation that you've become a playoff loser, which is where Doc Rivers is at right now. So here's Doc Rivers. Every single year, he's going to win you 60% of the games, right? That is success, in my opinion. But now it is, well, he can't win in the playoffs. And if you can't win in the playoffs now, suddenly it doesn't matter if you win 68 games. It doesn't matter if you win 59 games. It doesn't matter if everything you've done is precisely what a successful coach is supposed to do. Now you've got a stigma attached to you that you can't win the big one. And there is a guy that we all know and pretty much love who has been that guy for his whole life until last year, and that's Dusty Baker. Dusty, every single team wins. Every single team goes to the playoffs. Every single team has a chance to win a championship. All of them. He's never managed a team that hasn't gone to the playoffs. And in baseball, that's saying something. It's not some 39-win NBA team where, you get to make the playoffs as an 8 seed, right? Pre-play-in game. You got to win. You got to win your division for most of Dusty's career. And I think Dusty has won a division on all of his teams. And this juxtaposes with the idea that people say winning is hard and that winning is when you get to the playoffs in baseball, especially, it's a crapshoot. Well, if it's a crapshoot, why are you kicking me out the door when I don't win the 9% chance I have of winning a championship?
The reason why, Howard, it comes down to because the people who are making the call, which is usually at ownership level, because I believe GMs are just doing what their owners are pressuring them to do. They don't know what they're watching. They don't know what good coaching looks like, what bad coaching looks like. I've watched an owner complain that our coaching staff wasn't coaching. Like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? I was like, well, they're not standing up and yelling. So, like, in this owner's mind, like, you have to be like Hoosiers. You got to
flip the table, flip the spread.
The thing in your hand and screaming at guys yelling. Like, to him, that's coaching, but that's not coaching, right? Like, that's performative for the most part. And so when they don't know what they're watching, one, and number two, they don't know what the problem is. The easiest thing is just it's change for the sake of change. Oh, I need a new voice.
Need a voice.
Yeah, and that's an easy thing to hide behind, in part because not many people can quantify exactly what we're looking at. It's not like a player where he's averaging 35 points a game. Clearly, it's not his fault, right? But the other thing also is it's easier to divest yourself of a coach than it is of a player. Like, even if you know the player is probably the problem. So
it was very clear that Monty Williams was going down. One, because of the way they lost really big games, but also because of the DeAndre Ayton thing. It was like, which guy's going to win that battle? We know who's going to win that battle. Kate, go ahead.
A lot of this comes back to discussions we've had in previous episodes of just like the role luck plays in sports. Because for coaches, like you can almost think about it like, if you think about it like playing blackjack, everyone at the table is eventually going to get a dealt a blackjack hand. But it feels like in coaching, when you talk about Dusty Baker, you don't want yours to come too late, because then you won't still be, people will have fired you. You won't even be at the table anymore.
Yeah.
And often if it comes too early, right in the beginning, then people will chalk it up to just like, oh, beginner's luck.
Kate, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Kate, let me stop you right there to that point. Okay. You just said, Amin, that Budenholzer was close to getting fired and then they win the championship. The Boston Red Sox were going to fire Terry Francona, and he was down 3-0 to the Yankees. And now he's going to the Hall of Fame. Sorry, Kate, go ahead.
No, exactly. And like that, it's back to it's all about where you ended the movie. It's less about, in my mind, like ability of that particular person to be a successful coach. I think you probably have a lot of guys and women out there who can win a title, and yet it seems like we end up telling these stories that it's about them and their failures or their inabilities, character weaknesses to win the big one, when actually it's just, like most things in life, about timing and luck. And it seems like the perspective that owners take is that, and it makes sense when you've got billionaires, that they think they can control this thing. And they're not willing to accept that actually, if it is about patience and timing, I would be more suited in the long run to give fewer people a longer runway. But if I'm a billionaire and I'm never told no, then I'm always going to exert my willpower on this situation and believe that all the changes I make can get me what I want quicker, because maybe that's what happened on the business side. And so it seems like that's the perspective that the whole coaching carousel is the way those owners seem to look at it. What do you think, Amin?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely the billionaire I never get no plays a huge role in this, right? Because they feel like I invested all this money, and it's the thing that I've, encountered all my life, not only as a consumer, but also as a business person, probably, is when I put down money, when I make a decision, I get the results I'm looking for. And now for the first time, I don't feel that control. Someone's got to pay. This is somebody's fault, right? If we invested in a R&D project at my company, and like a digital music player that also has a radio on it, and we'll call it the Zune. And you guys told me this thing would compete with the other guys over there, that iPod thing, and then it fails. Typically in the kind of environment, like, well, someone's got to pay. The guy who came up with this idea, the one who sold this idea. And sports is not quite as straightforward as that, even though they treat it as such, even though the job security is probably worse in that regard because of that feeling. But it really comes down to, I think, like the refusal to accept A, the role of luck, and B, the refusal to accept I don't know what I'm looking at, right?
Yeah.
And we see this in the NFL. The greatest coach of all time, right? Bill Belichick. One would think, oh, he had an illustrious career that started in New England. Nope. He was the head coach of the Cleveland Browns, and it didn't work. And they thought, hey, he's the problem. Think about that. This guy's the greatest coach of all time, but there was at least one franchise that said he's the problem.
Well, and at that point in his career, maybe he was, and was not allowed to grow in, and didn't grow in, wasn't allowed to grow into the job. Then a little bit later, he kind of does know what he's doing. And, he's a football family guy. Of course, he knew what he was doing. Let's not forget the other considered to be greatest coach of all time, Vince Lombardi. If you read David Marinus's great book, When Pride Still Mattered, the biography of Vince Lombardi, one of the things they talk about was that Lombardi was a master tactician from Monday to Saturday, and on Sunday was the most useless guy on the field. Right? Was the most useless guy on the sidelines. And so I think that there's also, that idea of, Billy Beane and Moneyball, where he's telling Art Howe, the performative piece of this, to stand at the top step of the dugout because you look more presidential, you look more leaderly, you look more like the leader of men. All of these things are cosmetic. And also, let's not forget the owners who are listening to the fan base and listening to talk radio, and the public is making a decision for them when the public doesn't necessarily know what they're watching. I remember one day being at Fenway, and it was like a Wednesday, I don't remember, a night game or whatever, and somebody knocked on Terry Francona's door, when he and I were talking. Tita was like, okay, I'll be right back. And he goes in, and there was some whatever issue with Manny Ramirez. And then he sits back down and he says, close the door. And I said, okay. He closed the door and he says, you know what? You guys can kill me all you want about whether I know how to run a bullpen or not. You can kill me about the in-game decisions I make. But from 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock, those are the most peaceful hours of having this job. This bullshit, and he points at the locker room, this is the actual job. I'm a babysitter. I'm trying to herd all these cats together. I'm trying to figure out these egos. I'm trying to get these people to get along. This is the job. That's not the job.
Yeah.
That's the easy part. And so it's very interesting now that we're here. And when I say here, what I mean by that is that lack of professional respect, that you lost in 5 games to the Heat, therefore you've got to go, and you were on your way out anyway. And why are you on your way out? And once again, I think it's important, as we're talking about this from an NBA standpoint, it is a partnership league. The players have more power in this sport than any other sport. And so I think what's really interesting, Kate, when I think about this where we are, I think about it in terms of the empire and capitalism conversations we have, that production, and that there is no understanding of how hard it is, except when ownership tries or is asked to be held accountable. Then all of a sudden it's really, really complicated, and winning is hard and all of that. But when it comes to that position, we are very easy in calling people losers and calling people failures. And on that, we got 9 minutes left. We got 14 minutes left. I would like to pivot very quickly to the Giannis question, when Giannis talked about failure. And we've seen what happens when, is it a failure? How do we look at this? I look at where we are right now in terms of player empowerment. We are in the work-life balance generation. We have female athletes today, especially the tennis players, who have children without announcing their retirements. They don't have to quit anymore. They can decide when they come back. They make so much money now that they can manage their careers in ways that Martina Navratilova and John McEnroe and those guys couldn't do, because they had to play to win, and they had to win to make money. And so now we're looking at Giannis coming out and saying, hey, you know what? Have some perspective. It's not failure. And there's pushback to that. But I sort of liked what he said, because what he was really asking for was us to look at this zero sum and critique it a little bit better. Did you view that as a cop-out, or did you view that as, yeah, he's kind of right, and we tell our kids to respect the journey. We tell our kids that the journey matters, and that that there are different ways to appreciate what you're doing? Or is it at this level, you guys won 58 games and you crashed out, therefore, hey man, failure?
I mean, I was right there with what Giannis was saying, because I think often there's a video of actually Jamel Hill and interviewing Kobe Bryant, I forget in what forum, and she asks something like, when was one time where failure led to a different, better result for you? And he was like, well, actually, I've never failed. And then he went on to explain, his perspective that, like, well, if I didn't succeed in that one instance, that wasn't, again, I'm using this theme as like the theme of the episode for me, like that wasn't the end of the movie. So you have to watch the whole entire movie. And that's the way I think of it, in the same, like one of the people we were talking about, like leading up to this Meadowlarkers, at least for me, is James Harden, whose stories up to this point,
that movie's getting late. We're in the third act.
Exactly, is terrifyingly sad, to the point where when we were watching Game 7, and I was trying to explain to Catherine, my wife, who doesn't watch a ton of NBA, like what the James Harden story was. Like here's an interesting thing that will make you care about this. I'm like, okay, James Harden, like he's notoriously going to perform poorly in this game. And so if he starts performing poorly, like that's the storyline. But if he rises to the occasion and leads them to a Game 7 victory, it will be rewriting his script. One, she immediately bought into that storyline and like understood it completely. But when he did play poorly, she was tremendously sad for him, because of everything. We were watching it in Philly, everything that seemed to mean about who he was as a person. That, like, even though, I mean, you might know this more intimately, but it starts to mean that you must not work hard enough behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Do
Like,
you believe? I mean,
no,
sorry, Kate.
that's perfect. I mean, that's a perfect place to end. Like, instead of it being luck that he hasn't gotten his blackjack dealt to him yet. It means that he has missed a crucial part of the preparation out of just laziness or apathy. That is what it seems to mean.
Do you believe, I mean, in the idea of a loser? Like, I remember once Mike Tyson was fighting Alex Stewart. I think it was like 1990 or 91, whatever it was. And we were all in college and we were watching this fight. And one of our friends was looking at Alex Stewart and going, oh my goodness, look at him. He looks petrified. He looks terrified. And he did. He was fighting Mike Tyson. Of course, he looked terrified. And I was talking to my dad about this, and my father was like, that's all insane. They're professionals. At that level, they're not afraid. This is what they do for a living. And now we're at these different stages where we are at this level where you look at players and you ask, are players playoff challenged? Go ahead, Kate.
Well, let me jump in here, before you answer that, because like one story, I recently read Kara Goucher, Olympic marathoner, NCAA champion runner, and she tells this story of her first Boston Marathon, which she set out to win. She pulled ahead of everybody with like 7 miles left, and her coach had told her, like, don't ever take the lead. Like, you can, in the last couple miles, you come from behind and win it. Just don't set the pace and burn yourself out at any point. But she went because the pack was going so slow, and she went. And, in the Boston Marathon, there's little drivers where the photographers are ahead of you shooting. Yeah. And a photographer actually says to her after she pulls away and she spends a few miles running a very fast pace. And the photographer actually, and I don't know if this is kosher or not, says to her, like, Kara, be careful. Your pace is too fast. Wow. And to your point, Howard, of like, she's a professional, right? She's a professional marathoner. She's an Olympic runner. That doesn't mean something like that won't get or can't get in your head at certain moments. And so I think this notion that, like, oh, well, they're a professional, this is what they do. I'm like,
no, they're human beings. They're still people.
And yeah. Right. So to finish the Kara story, she actually backed off her pace. And she ended up not winning the Boston Marathon. And she felt like if that moment had not happened and she'd kept that pace up, she very likely could have won the Boston. And so I think it's an interesting anecdote about, like, doesn't matter who you are. Like, these things can worm their way into your brains and live there.
I mean, do you believe in the concept of the losing player?
Yes.
James Harden is going to the Hall of Fame. James Harden had 2 40-point games in that 7-game series against the Celtics. James Harden is an MVP player. James Harden is a first ballot Hall of Famer. He's not a kind of maybe one day get there Hall of Famer. James Harden is arguably one of the top 15 or 20 scorers in the history of the game. Do you believe in the losing player, or is it simply what happens by the end? Go ahead.
I think that winning on a team level starts with players who prioritize things that impact winning. If I believe in winning players, if I believe that Jimmy Butler is a winner, when Jimmy Butler was acquired by the Miami Heat, I went on LeBatard Show and I said, and they were like, what are they doing? They just locked up a bunch of money for a guy who isn't even a superstar. And I said, the guy's a winner. And they're like, what has he ever won? And I said, see, for the fans, winners are the guys that won the championship and won this, award. Inside the sport, winners are the people who do the things that, I guess it could be summed up with Heat culture, for example, right? Like that, working hard, that you're going to push yourself and push your teammates, that you're going to do the things required of winning. And it's not just things that appear on the stat line. To juxtapose Jimmy Butler and his approach with another guy who played for the Miami Heat, Hassan Whiteside, who, when the Heat acquired Hassan Whiteside and he started his career in Miami with a bunch of double-doubles and 7 block games and stuff like that. And my first appearance on LeBatard Show, Dan asked me, how was this guy playing in Beirut and like at the YMCA, and why did no one pick him up? And I said, because I didn't call him a loser at the time. I called him because he's an asshole. But pretty much, like, Hassan Whiteside is a guy who is very gifted, very talented, and is capable of putting up types of numbers that if you didn't watch, you didn't know, I'd say, hey, how'd the Heat do last night? This guy had 20 and 10 and 6 blocks. He had a great game. But when I tell you he does not do the things that impact winning, he does not sacrifice some of that stat chasing in favor of doing the little things it takes to win. And by the way, that stuff gets more and more razor thin the higher up you get. So James Harden is a guy who is incredibly talented. And everything you said is correct. And also, maybe there are some things there that he hasn't closed the gap on. So for me, it is a thing. It is a thing. There's some guys who are winners and some guys who are losers and some guys who aren't losers, but also haven't maximized all of the things that are needed in order to be winners. And some guys who have, and they just haven't experienced success.
Their playoff challenge where, let's face it, pressure is a real thing.
And so this is the part that I want to circle back to Giannis on. Is very important. It is a failure. If Giannis had lost in the finals to a peer of a team, then yes, those things apply. I think, yeah, man, like there's a lesson in all of it, and there's a journey, and you know, there's only one winner every year. Yes, that's the part where people get ridiculous, right? Just because we lost here doesn't mean we're losers, doesn't mean we're not winners. It just means, man, we got beat by a better team. Or the problem is Giannis was in a position this season where he was on the dominant team, the better team, versus a team that people point out was 10 minutes away from not even making the playoffs because they were down in their last playing game to Chicago in the fourth quarter. When you lose to a team that you should be way better, that is a failure. Can this failure go on and be, like in Kate's example, be a part of the end of the movie? And this is not necessarily the end of it. Sure. Indiana Jones was captured by the Nazis and let them get the Ark of the Covenant. At that moment, Indiana Jones has failed. Now, he figures some stuff out, keeps his eyes closed, says, "Marion, keep your eyes closed," and the ghosts come out of the Ark and kill all the Nazis, and Indiana Jones wins and prevails. Sure. But that doesn't mean there wasn't a failure that happened, right? The success would have been if Indiana Jones had just stopped the Nazis from getting it in the first place.
Or if Rocky had retired after Clubber Lang knocked him out.
And if Rocky had stayed retired, right? That would have been the success, right?
That would have been the success. Exactly.
I think within the NBA there must be, very specific knowledge of what you're talking about here. I mean, which is who is a winner who's never won? Mm-hmm. Who are the losers who happen to win?
Who does the work? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then there must and I think what's hard is when you're like even one layer removed, a lot of that gets muddled, where you just assume so-and-so was on a winning team, therefore they are a winner. Or so-and-so was a winner, but if because of luck, never quite won the big thing.
When you saw it,
Go
ahead, Kate.
No, it's it.
When you saw James Harden in those 7 games, I believed, and everybody clowned me on one of my group chats. I was like, I think he can come up big in this game 7. Why would I think that he wouldn't? And they're like, yeah, right. And he ended up laying a gigantic egg. And it was so inexplicable, except for maybe one thing. Okay, he may have had something else on his mind, or he's not a winning basketball player, because the way it wasn't like he went after a championship and just happened to lose. He was disengaged.
Yeah. And that's what you were talking about earlier, Howard. You started to mention this concept of pressure, and some people aren't performers. I've been a person who defended James Harden for much of his career, pointing out that in Houston, he played an incredibly taxing style of play. And he was playing 82 games when everyone else was load managing. And he was playing 40 minutes a game. And all of those things. And yeah, it's natural. You're tired by the time we hit April, May, and June. You're exhausted. You don't have anything left in the tank, whereas everyone else was resting and conserving their energy and all that. And I looked at this season and I said, wow, he's taken a step back. He's done the right things for what the team needs to do. And as a result, he's also expended less energy. This is the time where now he's going to have the best playoff of his life. And he started with game 1. He's amazing. And we're like, there you go. It's happening. And then as the series wore on, he reverted back to something that he's done not only as a pro, ladies and gentlemen, but think back to the 2012 NBA Finals, think back to the 2008 and 2009 NCAAs as Arizona State. He took Arizona State to the dance, and when he got there, there's something that just was like, and at the time I wrote it off as, well, he's not going to kill himself, he's trying to get drafted. Like, this, none of this matters. ASU's not good enough to go on a deep run. But when you take a step back, and Kate, to go back to your analogy one more time and watch the whole movie, this man has a lifetime of, in those moments, not coming up and meeting the moment.
And of course, the question is whether or not you can redeem by winning once.
So quick story. I know we only got a few minutes left, but like, so when I was playing at Colorado, we always, I don't know why, but our conditioning test was a 5K. And the first 4 years I was there, you'd run the 5K, and it was an honor system. Like, it was a 5K laid out, but it wasn't like an actual race where there were people at every turn. And the first 4 years I was there, I never saw a teammate cut a corner. And my last year, I saw a couple of my teammates literally cut a corner on this 5K race. And it just so happened that was the season where we just tanked out of the NCAA tournament. And I wasn't surprised, because I had literally been watching people cut corners. Yep. And I think that I project that experience onto somebody like James Harden, where there's a part of me that's like, maybe I haven't seen the whole movie. Maybe this is a redemption movie. Maybe he's never cut a corner in his life. And he goes home after all of these failures and it's just like, what more can I do? I care. I work hard. I don't know this, right? I'm just saying, is that the movie I'm watching? Or am I watching the movie of somebody who is getting the results they deserve?
Are you watching Bump Bailey in the National? In the Natural? Is it Bump Bailey?
Right. What am I watching?
There?
I can't tell.
The funniest thing, the last thing I'm going to say is, Kate, you asked, is it something inside? And there are guys for sure that you watch and you just know. Josh Hart was a player in LA. As soon as you saw him play, you knew this guy's a winner. He's about the right things. The Lakers are terrible at the time, but I said, this guy is going to be a guy who makes good teams better. He's not going to make a bad team good. He's not good enough talent-wise, but he's about the right things. Jalen Brunson was another guy. We watched him in Dallas and like, this guy gets it. David West was a guy in Indiana. He was an all-star, and then he famously turned down a $12 million option to sign for minimum in San Antonio. And everybody called him a loser and every bad word in the book. Oh, and he gave up all that money because he's just trying to ring chase or whatever. David West is a guy that was known in this league. He's about the right things. He is a winner, even if he hasn't won anything. He ends up going to Golden State and helps them win there, and was a big part of their success in Golden State, even though his stats aren't gaudy, and I don't know how many starts he had, but he was a winner.
These guys are there.
You know it when you see it.
Absolutely right. On that note, I will say we will farewell for Meadowlarkers 80. I will say two things. One, the Los Angeles Lakers were swept in the Western Conference Finals by the Denver Nuggets, but if you watch LeBron James's performance, there's nothing about that would make you say he was a loser. He was a guy who just he was trying really hard not to get swept. That was
he left it all out there.
He left it out there, and and that's all you can ask for. In fact, if indeed, whatever happens, pretty fascinating performance.
That's a great counterbalance, right? Like James Harden went to a game 7. LeBron James got swept. But I think all of us would sit here and say, LeBron left nothing left in the reserve tank. He gave everything he had to try to even eke out a single victory. Whereas Harden, you don't walk away feeling like, well, he gave everything he had.
Yeah, exactly right. We will be here next week for Meadowlarkers 81. Kate Fagan, Amin Elhassan. See you later.
Thanks, y'all.